Welcome to a Parallel Project Training, APM Project Management Qualification podcast based on the APM Body of Knowledge 7th edition. You should be using this in conjunction with our e-learning, podcasts, and potentially a tutor-led course. For more information, please visit www.parallelprojecttraining.com.
Okay, welcome to another Parallel Project Training podcast based on the Body of Knowledge 7th edition. My name is Michelle Greaves and I'm kindly joined today by John Bolton. So hello, John.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me today to talk about the Project Management Plan, the PMP. So we've got a couple of different learning outcomes to talk about here. And we're going to talk about the relationship between the deployment baseline and the development of the project management plan in linear and iterative life cycles. So that's quite a mouthful for us. The importance of producing a project management plan and the typical contents. So I'm kind of going to skip the first one, John, and start us down in why we produce a project management plan. So the importance of a PMP.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, going back a few years, I used to go to customers and they would always question why you need to write a plan. And the first thing you need to expunge from your sort of concept of this is a plan's not just a schedule. So a plan is more than that. A schedule is when things happen, Gantt chart. That's a sort, people will call that a plan.
Yeah.
And it is part of a plan, but it's not really all the whole story. So the project management plan, by most people's imagination, or understanding, I should say, is a bit more profound than that. It contains a couple of things. It contains, really how we're going to do this project, and it also contains the what is it we're going to do. That's sort of modified because we have to add in things like who's going to do it and when they're going to do it and all the rest of it. But if you think of it as holistically, it's a terrible word, but you think of it as a whole, it's your little workshop manual. It's your book of rules, it's your book of processes, it's your book of stuff. So when you get if you've got a reasonable sized project and you've got people coming and going, when that new member of staff, team member joins, you slide the project management plan across to them and say, read that, And at the end of it, they should have a reasonable idea what's going on. And not only what's going on, but how it's going on. So in the project management plan, it will say every Thursday, 3:00, we have a risk management meeting. Not sure that's the best thing to do, but let's say it does. That's what you do. And so in a way, it gives people a clear steer and a clear idea. It is this workshop manual. It's this
kind of
catalogue of what's going on.
If something happened to the project manager, touch wood, that doesn't happen, but somebody could pick up the PMP and still be able to see where everything is, what we're doing. Whereas you might not be able to do that just from a Gantt chart, just from a schedule. It's got those other signposts for them to be able to pick it up and carry on. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, there's other benefits to it as well. I mean, it means you can audit it.
Yeah.
So the sponsor can be, because the sponsors are going to sign this off, right? So they're going to sign it off at the end of, the second stage of the life cycle and the business case and the project management plan. So we've got this document that the project managers kind of subscribe to. So it's not unreasonable. The sponsor says to them, well, have you done this or have you done that? The scope's in there, the timescale's in there, the budget's in there. So when the project manager comes back and says, I've spent 20 times what you gave me to spend, the sponsor's not unreasonably going to be unhappy because they thought, well, that's what we agreed, and now all of a sudden you've done something differently. So that's all well and good at the end, but you can use the project management plan as a really powerful tool for audit and assurance throughout the project, because someone can go along and read that project management plan and say, so it says here, you're doing this, can you show me how you're doing that? And so it gives you that little bit of reassurance. No one's suggesting you don't trust the project manager, of course, but, we all make mistakes, and in the heat of battle, things can go wrong. So
it gives everybody clarity to know who's doing what and when, doesn't it?
Right. It's a great tool, everyone says, who gets a copy? And, well, you give bits of it to different people. Maybe you might want to redact some of it when you give it to some certain stakeholders in the business, or you might not want to reveal all of your costs or something like that. But, I don't think it's unreasonable that pretty much anybody that's got a reasonable involvement in the project, should I get a look at it? Because it's basically, I think the other thing to remember is it's not necessarily one document.
Yes.
The thought that Hinkley Point C has got one project management plan for the entire job, I think, is a bit naive. Frankly, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be a composite of multiple hundreds of different documents spread across multiple suppliers. And the other thing, of course, is that as you go down the levels of management in a project, I might have a project management plan at one level, but I'll give a work package to somebody else. Well, that work package might be their project. So they might write themselves a project management plan for their work package, and that'd be all good stuff. And in that, they might give a work package to somebody else. So, this is not one monolithic document that sits on the shelf and gathers dust. It's quite reasonably multiple documents.
Probably electronic as well, rather than having it printed off, because things might change.
That's right. That's right. So I think, in terms of what's in it, you've got the basics, you've got the, why are we doing something? They talk about the who, what, why, when, and we've included the why in this, but really I reserve the why for the business case.
Yeah.
That's more about benefits and requirements and objectives.
But you could signpost or link to the business case from the PMP, or pull elements from the business case into your PMP.
That's right. So conceptually, this document contains links and guidance to others.
Yeah.
It contains what we're going to do, so the scope of the project and the product, how we're going to gather requirements and that sort of thing. Who's going to do it? Responsibility assignment matrices, organisational breakdown structures, delegation schedules, role descriptions. How much? Budget, cash flow forecasts, how we're going to deal with variations, how we're going to measure progress, like things like earned value. When we're going to do stuff, resource histograms, precedence diagrams, Gantt charts, that sort of thing. How? So there's a whole bunch of processes, and the processes would include things like, for example, health and safety, but also some of the other. Health and safety would be what they call a subsidiary plan. So again, the project, you're working for a big organisation, you're not going to write a health and safety plan. You're going to refer to your organisation's health and safety policies, and if those policies require you to do something, that's what you do. You don't just write a plan just because it says you've got to write a plan. You say, I'm going to follow my business's health and safety policies, sections 1 to 7, 14 to 28, and that means I have to do these things. I have to go and write a trials plan, or I have to go and do risk assessments or whatever it is. So
this is where those documents you might be pointing to other documents rather than everything being in one place.
Yeah, it's unlikely a project to have its own procurement strategy. They'll quite often talk about an organisation's procurement strategy or their own risk management plan, or you might have a corporate configuration management process that you can subscribe to. So, the processes, don't run away with the idea that this is a massive document. We work with a large customer, and their project management plan is 2 sides of a paper.
Yeah.
All it does is says where all the other bits are.
Exactly.
But, it solves problems. So,
supporting all those processes will then be the documents. So for your risk management process, you're going to have a risk register or a risk log. For your procurement process, you might have some documentation to do with procurement. So it's just connecting all the dots between all those different bits that your project needs to work with.
That's right. It's just a big indexing job.
Any other contents you'd like to talk about, John, or shall we move on to the deployment baseline?
Well, the APM's introduced this concept of a deployment baseline, and interestingly, project management plan doesn't appear in any of the glossaries. There isn't a section in the body of knowledge for a project management plan. So I'm a bit bemused by that, because everywhere I go, this is like the key document, and to sort of overtly miss it out is a bit of a shortfall to me. It's never, to be fair, I suppose it's never been that high on the agenda, but I don't know. I don't seem to be alone in that view either. But anyway.
It seems to be a given. It's going to be something that we need to do.
It's like they're making the assumption that you're going to write all this down somewhere, and why don't you call it a project management plan? But, you could call it whatever you like, really. Call it banana or something. So they have got this idea of its deployment baseline, which is confusing a lot of people. But the word baseline is a term that we use in project management to describe a particular status quo or a particular equilibrium that applies to the project. And we can use the term baseline as a collective for multiple aspects of that. So we might use a cost baseline or a time baseline or a quality baseline or a requirements baseline or a benefits baseline. So any of the success criteria can be baselined, basically. And the baselines are used for measuring progress. So if we expect this project to take 10 weeks, we can measure progress against that expectation. And if we start to diverge from that expectation, we can spot it early enough to make some actions. So we're using the baseline to spot variations, and we're using it also to make sure that we can communicate that to other people so that they understand what we think we're doing. So we're going to spend £1 million, we're going to take 6 months, and we're going to give you one of these things, and it's described like this. And if they go, yeah, that's what I want, then kind of that's what your baseline is. Now, the term deployment baseline, I think, is just confusing people a bit, because the deployment is simply a description of the project in those terms against those success criteria. And when you talk about, I think the assessment criteria talks about the difference between linear and iterative, doesn't it? Yeah, in linear and iterative. I don't necessarily see the difference between the two, actually, except probably what will happen in an iterative life cycle is you're more worried about the functionality end and less worried about how you get to it. So you're more worried about a baseline of functionality. And I'm thinking IT systems here, really, where they have a deployment baseline of functionality rather than a deployment baseline of product. So I can give you a bit of software, but it might not do what you want. But my deployment baseline would be that I've given you the software, therefore I've ticked the box. But your deployment baseline might be the functionality, therefore I haven't ticked the box. So they're normally called output-based specifications, and you see those on jobs where customer says, I don't care how you do it, I just want 5 megawatts generating capacity into the grid. And, we don't care if that's gas or nuclear or whatever, but big example perhaps. But so output-based specifications can also have a baseline. And I think with iterative life cycles, from what I understand, is that they're usually more baselined around the outcomes rather than about the inputs. But in essence, they're the same thing, because what you're doing is you're saying, this is what I think I'm going to give you. And it ought to be measured in a way that I can measure progress against it, so that we can determine how we're getting on. So your deployment baseline, time, cost, quality, functionality, scope, benefits, all those other things. And, you use any permutation of those as you wish to describe it.
So just coming back to the assessment criteria here, it asks about the relationship between the deployment baseline and the development of the PMP. So what would you say are the distinctions between deployment baseline and the PMP, or is there a distinction? How do they kind of link into each other?
Unless you understand the baseline, you can't write the plan. Because if I've got a deployment baseline that says I'm going to build a bridge, it'd be rubbish if I went to produce a plan to build a spaceship. So the project management plan has got to be a means of achieving the end, and the end, as we've described it, is the baseline. So the baseline is part of the plan, and the two are inextricably linked. If you change one, you could end up changing the other. So you might have a different process that gets you to the same point. But if you've got a time, cost, quality equilibrium and you change the quality aspect of it, you may well end up changing the budget aspect of it. So, and that may well change the rest of the plan, because that might change the way I manage cost, or it might change the way I manage specifications. So there's a bit of kind of a bit of wordsmithing going on here. And really the deployment baseline is a large proportion of the project management plan. But it's not the whole story. It's not the whole bit.
So would you say we need a plan, we need the PMP to get us into development or into deployment, and what we do is we get that baseline, we get it signed off so that we can start. But along the way there might be some changes that happen that mean we need to change the project management plan, and as you say, might need to change other elements of that around there, which might cause us to re-baseline. But at that point, we're then re-baselining the original plan.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's a general rule of thumb. If you're doing the wrong thing, stop doing it.
Exactly.
And find out what you should be doing and start doing that instead.
Yeah.
So, and if that means re-baseline the project, re-baseline the project. Don't re-baseline it every Friday.
Yeah.
Though, but although in an iterative life cycle, they may well say that's perfectly appropriate.
Yes.
Because we've determined that we're not going to achieve our requirements if we carry on like we are. So
Yeah.
they have a far more rapid cycle time.
Yes.
It's than the more traditional linear life cycle approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that was great, John. Thank you very much for that.
All right, pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast and found it informative. To find out about our training courses, e-learning or tutor-led course, please go to www.parallelprojecttraining.com.